Okay, so let me introduce myself briefly. I'm Simon Warnford Davis, or Simon Davis is my professional name, from Keller Williams. Who are Keller Williams? I did actually have a conversation with someone this morning, and he did know, he had heard of us, but we are actually the world's largest estate agent. And I've put on there that no one has ever heard of because a lot of people haven't. Not all of us call ourselves Keller Williams, it has to be said. So, for example, Milton Keynes, there's Lion Estates, 360 Properties in Aylesbury, and so forth and so forth. But there's about 400 of us in the UK now. In Northamptonshire, it's basically myself and a guy called Neil Mercer. So he works to the east of the county, I work to the west, although we are about to jointly launch a property tomorrow morning. We're independent, so I don't know if anyone saw Panorama in the summer, July, I think it was, talking about some of the high street agents. But there are definite benefits of working with a local independent, dare I say, honest agent. We're very much technology led. The beauty of us is that, you know, we are local, but we're also backed by the world's largest. So with that comes all the benefits of the technology behind the scenes that we have to play with. And the important thing actually is we're proactive, not reactive. So we do an awful lot on social media in terms of promoting properties before they come to the market. We do videos, we leaflet drop the localities. So I've got a property coming up next week, and I'm literally leaflet dropping 3 villages, letting people know before it hits the market that it's coming along. No other agent does that. And of course, we're 100% customer focused. So I can forward this slide. So that's me. I mean, ultimately, Prestige Awards, I've been sort of retail real estate agent of the year for Northamptonshire for the last 2 years. And I have 97% 5-star Google reviews. So I'm at 71 at the moment. It should be 75 by the end of the week. So I've had 3 completions this week. Right, so let's hit the market. This is taken from Google AI, which is a fantastic thing to use nowadays. So hopefully it's fairly accurate. But as you can see, the average sort of house price in the area is between 317 and 370,000 pounds as of January. And they're saying a sort of 1 to 2% annual increase. Now, actually, the government have just released figures in the last few days, and house prices in general across the whole sort of country went up 0.63%. And what I will highlight is the sort of local variations on some of the following slides. But while volumes have dropped roughly by 13%, I mean, we have found demand remains very much there. I mean, my autumn, for example, it was a bit like spring. I mean, I literally had 2 properties left by Christmas time. I just sold a whole raft between October and beginning of December, really. So it just goes to show it's not always about the spring market. Key trends include growing interest in energy efficient homes. The one I just mentioned, you know, there's a sort of it's air source pumped. So, you know, it doesn't have any gas, it is purely electric and that. And obviously demand for commuter friendly locations is always important. So, you know, in our area, getting onto the train to London from Milton Keynes, for example, which is a quick line, is something that people strive for. In terms of popular areas, and this is actually Northampton itself, we're looking at Abington, which is ever so popular all the time, really. Duston, West Hunsborough is popular, Upton, Kingsthorpe, and Wootton, and that includes Wootton Fields as well. Partly due to the schooling, partly due to the location, and partly due to sort of road network access and that sort of thing. And why are people moving into Northamptonshire? Well, I probably would say in the last 4 or 5 years, for me, 50%, believe it or not, of my customers have actually moved up from the Milton Keynes area. So why are they doing that? I mean, I'm one of those. I used to live in Stony Stratford and Warden, just outside Milton Keynes. It's because of the better value up here. I mean, house prices are literally 15, 20% cheaper. Yet, we're only sort of 20 minutes, half an hour, 40 minutes from Milton Keynes. So that's sort of very interesting. All my competitors talk about people coming out of London. I mean, I personally don't see it as much as they promote that. But certainly from the home counties, and London is definitely what people are doing. And funnily enough, people are actually moving across into Northamptonshire from Oxfordshire and the Cotswolds. Why is that? It's just because the Cotswolds is extremely expensive now. Right, so what are the key trends and what is the performance in 2026 to date? So the county average is roughly 320,000, where detached homes average 450 and semi-detached 280 and terraced, as you can see, 235-ish. New build versus existing, new builds command a premium, averaging 369,000, significantly higher than established properties, or pre-loved, as I like to say. Now, it's a bit like buying a new car. Everyone wants a new car, and you do pay a premium. It's the same for houses. I did some analysis last year, and generally speaking, new homes are 14 to 15% more than pre-loved. That's not taking into consideration any incentives from the builders, it has to be said, which could be a stamp duty reduction or a £6,000 voucher for a holiday and all of that sort of thing. Sales volumes are down a bit, indicating a tighter market. And that's really important for sellers because ultimately, and I've been shouting from the rooftops about this for a good amount of time now, you have to be competitive in the market. There's no point in putting a house on the market at an overinflated price because it'll literally just stay there. And then you're ultimately eroding any best price that you're going to achieve. And clearly, it's going to take an awful long time to shift as well. So prices have remained above the 2022 peak, and we are seeing some improvements. And actually, it is very sort of regional and very localized as well, as you'll see from the heat maps I'm about to show you. And, as I mentioned earlier, why are people moving into sort of Northamptonshire? I mean, it is cheaper, 55% cheaper than the national average, for example. So people are moving up from the southeast. And I do have people moving further down from the north as well. Right, so here's my lovely heat maps, which I really, really do like. And we were talking just before we started the session in terms of what does the north-south divide look like? Well, there is a north-south divide, and the north are actually doing really, really well and have done for over a year now in terms of house price increases, to the expense, really, of the southeast. So it is a thing. And you can see on this map that the variance is really, I mean, I can't see much blue on here. There we go, London, -7%. But, if you move up towards into Wales, the north and Scotland in particular, actually, then, you are seeing significant increases of up to 32%. And this is in the last 5 years. Interesting to see round about Milton Keynes, there is a little bit of a hotspot there. Right, so this is the local area. So this is Northampton, as you can see there. This is the 5-year sort of view. So the prices have all gone up in the last 5 years, between 3% and 23%. Now, there are some hotspots, and one in particular at the moment actually is Bedford. And, we're wondering why that is, but I have to say, I'm sort of thinking it might have something to do with Universal Studios, in part. I've got another one here, which is the last 12 months. So you can see a more varied pattern depending on where you are in the locality. So parts of Northampton, for example, and to the west, are down sort of 3%. And then, like I just talked about, down into Bedford, prices are up sort of almost 5%. And then some of the areas in between, we're looking at between sort of, well, there's little blue really in the majority of Northamptonshire. So, we are looking at a 1 to 2 to 3% increase, like the data at the beginning sort of mentioned. And this is what's happened in the last 3 months. So the north areas of the county and just above are sort of going backwards, and Northampton and surrounding areas into sort of Bedfordshire and Rushden and what have you have increased very slightly in the last 3 months. So it is very localized, and this just sort of goes to show how it is really. And here we are in terms of drilling down to another level, 12 months. So again, Northampton areas, some Northampton areas have gone down slightly, and then to the east, sort of Rushden and Wellingborough and what have you have increased slightly as well. And then this is Northamptonshire in terms of average property price. It is so, as you can see, really there's a whole spread there. But the majority of properties really are sort of 300,000 to 400,000 or more. There's some areas that are more affluent and higher prices as a result. But that's quite interesting to see. And for anyone who didn't actually know what Northamptonshire looked like on a map, that is it. And I have to say, I wasn't 100% sure what sort of towns included Northampton and not. So that was quite an interesting slide to sort of put in. Okay, so this is a company called Property Data, and as you can imagine, there's an awful lot of sources in terms of property prices, and they do vary. So, I always have to take everything with a pinch of salt in my business. Some are more sort of pro, and others are sort of a bit more pessimistic. But there are averages. And if we look at this one here, what we can see is since sort of, I suppose, February 24, prices are starting to edge up. And clearly, up to 2023, they went up substantially. Now it's saying actually the price per square foot is sort of around about £300. I mean, generally speaking, it's between 300 and 350. But I'll cover that off. And in the last year, this is saying prices have gone up 1% in the last 3 years on average. We've gone down 1%. And of course, the 5-year view is 15%. I've taken a snapshot of a couple of property types. So the first one's 3-bedroom and the second one is 4-bedroom. So if we look at these in Northampton, we can see generally a spread between £200,000 and £370,000 for 3-bedroom properties. Now, everyone quite often asks me, what's the average square foot? And a lot of people actually value their houses on what they think their house is worth on a square footage basis. So if we take the average of, let's say, £300 to £350 per square foot, actually you can see that's not true, because the house price is all over the shop here. And it varies on location, quality of the property, type of property, specification of the property. I mean, as you can imagine, there's a whole raft of reasons as to why a house is worth a particular figure, and this just goes to show that it can change from street to street. 4 bedrooms, this is similar. So we're looking at an average between 325 and 575,000 for a 4-bedroom property, and of course that will be sort of depending where you are in the locality and in Northamptonshire. Right, so this is the long-term view in terms of what house prices have looked like, which always makes interesting reading. And clearly, everyone sort of says there's no better place to put your money than bricks and mortar. And this just shows exactly that. Yes, like all things, there are ups and downs, but as you can see, the general trend is upward, with a couple of hiccups in between. But, largely speaking, if you look at this chart between 1995 and the last 20 years, really, it's been fairly much an uphill sort of chart. And if you look at Northamptonshire versus England and Wales, we are behind the average in terms of prices, but as you can see, the correlation is fairly strong, really. Where are we versus the rest of the country? In the middle. The average here is 310,000. So, needless to say, Buckinghamshire, Greater London, Hertfordshire, and so forth. Obviously, the house prices there are far more expensive than the average. And then, if you look at East Riding of Yorkshire, Tyne Wear and Durham, for example, house prices are far less. Why are we seeing that north-south divide that I showed earlier? Partly it is because there's better value up north. So, people are moving into the Midlands if they're from the southeast, or into the north, where, they get more bang for your buck, if you like. It's as simple as that. Now, the interesting thing from this, and this was an article that the Daily Mail published in January. And I don't know why some of the sort of UK rankings are slightly odd. For example, where is 16 and 17, but we'll bypass that. Actually, 1 to 9, they're all in Scotland in terms of price increases. But if we actually look just at the UK, or England, should I say, then, Northampton is on the hit list. So that's really good to see that, Northampton this year, is a bit of a hotspot when it comes to buying a property. As an estate agent, we look at time to sell for properties. So 44 is, more days than the rest of these on the list. So, that does mean that properties are not in as much demand as other parts of the country, I suppose we could say. And the conversations I have with buyers is you need to be realistically priced, because I have come across properties on the market for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, normally with different agents, and they've just not found a buyer. And that's purely because they're overpriced. I mean, properties don't sell due to one of two reasons, and two reasons only. That's the marketing and the price of the property. I've just actually sold a property that completed this week, and that had been flooded twice. So every property does find a buyer, and that's proof of that. So the future outlook, well, the growth factors are continued demand for sustainability, energy efficient and smart homes is on the rise. There are investment opportunities, and I've not talked about investing in property and renting properties out so far, but clearly there are people that look for property and the income generated from a property for their retirement and so forth. So that is a thing. So again, Northampton, for example, is far cheaper than Milton Keynes. So we are seeing more people wanting to buy properties as an investment in Northampton than Milton Keynes, just because they're better value for money. The market drivers, the market is increasingly influenced by affordability. Mortgage rates are going down, but mortgages are very expensive now. I mean, for anyone that sort of took out a mortgage, 5 years ago, coming into the market this year, then it's a bit of a worry in terms of having to sort of remortgage. So as early as in early 2026, the market is described as stable, with affordability being a prime driver for sort of buyer decisions, and that's sort of based on sort of Northamptonshire. Right, when is a good and bad time to sell a house? Again, a question I get asked all the time. I mean, ultimately, there is no bad time to sell a house. 2 years ago, I put a property on the market, 16th of December. Everyone says, don't put a property on in December. And I say, why not? At the end of the day, there is far less competition. Those that haven't sold their properties are starting to take their properties off, October, November to put them back on in the new year. And that property we put on at 450, it sold for 467 500. I mean, we had an open house, and all of the people that actually viewed the property wanted to sort of buy it, so the price went up. But ultimately, in that scenario, it was a case of that house probably having five in the locality competing with it at that time. Come Boxing Day in the new year, it could well have been 10 properties competing with it. And then in the spring, it could well have been 15 properties. So we have to take everything with a pinch of salt, but ultimately, there is never a bad time. But as you can see on this chart, anything from sort of mid-February into the end of June is great. And then, good, bad, or okay for the rest of the year. September actually is mid-September is a good time to sort of put a house on the market after everyone's back from holidays and what have you, back to school. So that's quite a good time. That's sort of the second best time, if you like, in the year after the spring. And one of the things why it's sort of good to okay in July is because obviously if people are moving area, they want to get their children into schools for September, then they're cut off generally, as they need to find a property by the end of June to achieve their goals, based on the fact that a house purchase does take 3 to 4 months to generally sort of go through. Why have I got a little chick? Is it because Easter is approaching? No, it's not. If there's one thing I've learned in this game, is for those that go out and look for properties before they've put theirs on the market, it's a very risky business. Why is that? Well, at the end of the day, if you find the right property, and let's face it, all the nice properties sell quickly, then you're going to lose out if you're not on the market, let alone under offer. So it's a chicken and egg situation. Why is it good to put your house on the market? Clearly, as I've just stated, it's because you're proceedable when you do find the right property, bearing in mind there will be others after that property as well. For the last 2 times I've moved, I actually moved into rented accommodation. Part of the reason was that I'm going to put myself in a really good position when I do find the right property. And it's also to get the best price, because if you sort of find a property and you want it, you're going to want to sell quickly. And to sell quickly, you need to have a low price. So the other aspect of that is if you take your time, do it properly, then ultimately you can generate up to 10% higher prices by sort of going down that route. And then the other important thing actually is you know how much you've got to spend on your next property, because at the end of the day, it's all about the numbers. And if people come to me saying, well, I don't know if my house is going to sort of achieve 500,000, 550,000, I don't know how much I've got to spend on my next house, which is a fair point. So there's that to sort of think about as well. And for most people that are buying and selling houses, it's always the difference between what you're buying at and what you're selling at, actually, which is the important factor. So that's me. There are, I think it's 1.6 million people coming out of a very low fixed rate mortgage rate this year. So a lot of worried people in terms of what do we do when that happens. I mean, I know one locally, and they are actually putting their house on the market very shortly because their mortgage runs out in June, and they've got a big mortgage and they sort of know that it's going to go up tenfold. I mean, he's an accountant, so he knows what the numbers are going to look like. So it is very important to sort of think ahead in property all the time. And I suppose one of the other things I've learned about in this game is you need to plan and think ahead. So, for those sort of getting into sort of more mature years, thinking about the future, downsizing, do they need a bungalow? Do they want a bungalow? You're far better off planning ahead and actually finding the house of your dreams if that's a bungalow you're after, rather than having a fall or stroke or what have you, and then having the family have to find you a more appropriate property without perhaps your involvement and quickly. So that's certainly sort of a big factor.